October 2005, West Yorkshire police crossed over into Tyneside and raided a council house in Sunderland's rundown Ford estate. They arrested a 49-year-old man called John Humble. He was charged with 4 counts of perverting the course of justice for crimes dating back to the late 1970s, when the Yorkshire Ripper was prowling the streets of northern England, brutally murdering young women. Humble and the Ripper are linked by a 25-year-old mystery. A mystery that would become one of the greatest criminal hoaxes Britain had ever seen.
I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me.
This is the story of Britain's most infamous serial killer. A man who evaded capture and kept on killing for over 5 years because of a malicious hoax.
I am the Ripper.
The mystery of the Yorkshire Ripper hoax has baffled police for over 25 years, until now. With rare access to police footage, we can finally tell the story of who this man was and how the Ripper hoaxer, Wearside Jack, was finally caught.
I'm Jack. I say you are still having no luck catching me.
It was 1978, and Britain was going through massive change. The winter of discontent was about to hit the country. Punk was reshaping the musical map, and the Labour government faced a vote of no confidence. In these uncertain times, the country was gripped by reports of a serial killer on the loose in the north of England.
The body was found by a woman about 50 yards from the road on grassland in Savile Park.
The killings had begun in 1975. In 3 years, 9 women had been brutally murdered in Bradford, Leeds, and Manchester.
The way he killed Wilma McCann was so distinctive that it's become his trademark.
Many of the victims were prostitutes, lured to back streets or waste ground before being struck on the head with a hammer and stabbed to death in attacks that were so frenzied, he was nicknamed the Yorkshire Ripper. Previously, the murders had attracted limited national press interest, but his next attack would make the Ripper headline news. He murdered Building Society clerk Josephine Whittaker in a public park. The nation was spooked.
It's like to go up to the shops now, anywhere near the Chapel Town area, it's very frightening.
You don't let your kids go out in the street.
There was a media frenzy, as the murderer was now seen to be targeting mainstream society, and the police seemed powerless.
Do you think this is the work of the Ripper?
Life changed as we knew it. It just stopped. We didn't go out. Husbands didn't let their wives even go down to the corner shop once it had got dark. Companies started providing taxis and buses and minibuses. Women were walking home from the factories without a care in the world, suddenly started carrying knives or walking in twos. As soon as it became dark, wherever you were, footsteps were terrifying.
As the Ripper began striking outside of his typical red light territory and into respectable areas, West Yorkshire police came under increasing pressure to make an arrest.
There's only one individual that I'm concerned about that was in that area that night, and that's the killer.
All resources were channeled into the case, and the hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper became the biggest manhunt that Britain had ever seen.
Who do you think the Ripper is?
I think it's somebody local, somebody who knows the area.
Do you ever go out on your own now?
Never.
Well, I think it's about time he was caught. It's very, worrying. For all the probably women that live.
Like everyone else, one young Sunderland man was caught up in the endless news coverage about the gruesome details of the Ripper murders. He'd become obsessed with the serial killer, keeping newspaper cuttings about the attacks and victims. This fascination was coupled with a bitter grudge against the police, dating back to 1975 when he was imprisoned for assaulting an off-duty officer. He now had reason to taunt the police. All of this inspired him to get involved more directly in the Ripper case, an involvement that would change the entire course of the police investigation. It all began with a letter.
Dear sir, I cannot give my name for obvious reasons. I am the Ripper. You say I'm clever, and I am.
Head of the Ripper investigation was Assistant Chief Constable George Oldfield. Oldfield and his second-in-command, Detective Superintendent Dick Holland, were charged with the task of finding the Ripper. In the first 3 years of the investigation, police had received hundreds of hoax letters. This one, however, was different. Not only did its author claim to be the killer, he also specifically referred to the 1975 murder of prostitute Joan Harrison. The police had never publicly attributed this murder to the Ripper. The writer's boasting account caught the Ripper Squad's attention.
We did consider that it may not be factual, but there was so much that indicated a possible truth, having connected us with the murder of Joan Harrison in Preston. We discussed it, and George Oldfield made the decision that we wouldn't follow it slavishly, but we would take cognizance of it and make some discreet inquiries.
Despite their cautious interest in the letter writer, the Ripper Squad weren't convinced enough to refocus their investigation because of it. Procedure, however, dictated that they look into it. And so handwriting expert Diane Simpson was drafted in to assess the evidence.
One of the most interesting features is the tremendous attention he pays to detail. The word Ripper is of interest. The strong downstroke and up again is often described as indicating a strong moralistic view rather than religious.
Now, I've seen a lot of anonymous letters, but these were different. They didn't follow the usual pattern. I spent a long time with the police, and we came up with a likely profile.
Yes, he's a loner. He is a creature of habit.
It was someone who liked detail, was used to writing figures of some sort, somebody who liked to get things right. It wasn't a weak man, it wasn't a bit of a wimp. This was not a pussycat. Interesting, an enigma.
Despite the graphologist's profile and the potential connection to the murder of Joan Harrison, police were still not convinced the letter was genuine and chose not to take it seriously. This decision would mark the beginning of a dangerous game of cat and mouse between the hoaxer and West Yorkshire police, whilst the real Yorkshire Ripper continued his killing spree. By the spring of 1978, the Yorkshire Ripper had claimed 8 victims. The north of England was in a state of near panic.
Clearly, this is a man who is ill.
It is now time for you to come forward and give yourself up.
Police had been hunting the killer for over 2 years without success, when suddenly they received a letter claiming to be from the Ripper himself. Over the course of the investigation, police had already received hundreds of bogus letters and had decided to do nothing with this one. So the hoaxer, frustrated by this lack of response, wrote again.
Dear Sir, I have already written to Chief Constable Oldfield. I told him, and I'm telling you, to warn them hoes I'll strike again, and soon.
This time, he decided to contact the national press directly.
The editorial staff at the Daily Mirror in Manchester who got this letter, it would have been a front page story for them, exclusive. So what the editorial people did, they went along to see George Oldfield to tell him that they'd received this letter, which was postmarked Sunderland.
The police made a deal with the press. They persuaded them not to publish this second letter for 12 months on the condition that some real progress was made with the case. Pressure was mounting on Oldfield and Holland. They now had a deadline.
If we did nothing about it, and they turned out to be connected, then what would the public reaction be afterwards?
The police progressed cautiously with the letters, but the Ripper would up the ante by claiming his 9th victim. This time, instead of a young girl in her teens or 20s as his previous 5 victims had been, the Ripper targeted 40-year-old prostitute Vera Millward.
Old's luck next time, I hope.
Unnervingly, This latest murder was exactly what the first letter had predicted.
The letter contained a phrase, "Next time an old slut, maybe Manchester." We then had the murder of Vera Millward in Manchester, and she was the oldest one of the lot. So it looked a pretty good forecast, which reinforced our idea that the letters were genuine.
The Ripper squad were thrown into turmoil as they realized the letters could now be authentic.
There was so much in them that indicated the possible truth, having connected us with Harrison and having connected us with Millward. Then we felt that we had to follow them.
This decision proved to be a terrible mistake. Not only did the letters provide the police with a completely inaccurate profile of the killer, but more significantly, detectives would be led away from the real Yorkshire Ripper, just at the moment that they were beginning to get tantalizingly close to him. Just 7 months earlier, when the Ripper claimed his sixth victim, 21-year-old Jean Jordan, he'd unwittingly left behind a vital clue.
He hadn't realised that he'd given her a £5 note and that she'd slipped it into a little pocket inside the handbag. So that when the body was found and the police later found the handbag, they realised that this £5 note probably had been given to her by the murderer.
It was a new £5 note, and it was realised that that batch had been broken down and quite a lot of it had gone to a bank in Bradford.
I think we can say that we can narrow our inquiry down to one particular factory.
This precise detective work allowed police to trace the £5 note to the payroll of one particular Bradford haulage company. The Ripper squad took in the entire workforce for questioning. Among them was a truck driver named Peter Sutcliffe. It was the first time the police would come face to face with the real Yorkshire Ripper.
People wonder about Peter Sutcliffe. Very ordinary looking guy. The sort of guy that if I'd been on a train late at night and some yobs had got on and I might think I'm going to sit by someone who looks okay just within reach, Peter Sutcliffe was just that person.
Sutcliffe may have seemed like an ordinary guy, but he was in fact no stranger to the police at this time. He'd been arrested and charged nearly a decade earlier for going equipped for theft in possession of a hammer. But the Ripper squad had no record of any such arrest and made no connection to their investigation. The police were looking at their killer and didn't even know it.
He was always telling his sisters and his wife, you can't go out. You know, there's a madman on the loose and, you know, don't forget the Rippers out there and you be careful. All the time he was going out there with a ball-peen hammer and chisels and knives and yet he had that sort of arrogance and that insolence to be saying, no, you be careful out there.
Despite not arousing suspicion and his being eliminated following the £5 note incident, police did begin to take an interest in Sutcliffe, particularly as one of the Ripper's surviving victims, Marilyn Moore, had provided detectives with a photo fit that was remarkably similar to him.
There was a certain core of information that actually was leaning towards Peter Sutcliffe. There was the £5 note. There was the general appearance of the beard and the gap in the teeth. There was the fact that his car had been seen across the cross-area sightings of the prostitute areas.
He left Wellington boot imprints of a certain size, and we were able to get the make of the boot and the size of the boot. So that told us something about the person, a workman type.
Now, the senior officers who were leading the inquiry had actually got the right lines in place here to trap the killer because he came into the system a number of times.
With this wealth of incriminating evidence against him, the net was closing in on Sutcliffe. And then, the hoaxer struck again.
I haven't written for about a year, to be exact. I wasn't kidding last time I wrote, saying the whore would be older this time, and maybe I'd strike in Manchester for a change. You should have took heed.
Almost a year to the day since the last hoax letter, a third correspondence from Sunderland arrived, hand addressed to Oldfield. This letter seemed to give a much more detailed insight into the mind of the Yorkshire Ripper.
Funny, the lady mentioned something about being in the same hospital before I stopped her whoring ways.
It was the third letter that arrived in early 1979 that really grabbed Oldfield's interest. It makes reference to the murder of a woman who'd been killed in the grounds of the Royal Infirmary, and she had been in that hospital for treatment. In the letter writer makes reference to, funny, she said something about being in hospital before I ended her whoring ways.
The lady won't worry about hospitals now, will she?
Quite crucial information which Oldfield believes only the killer could know.
Mr. Oldfield certainly thought it was him, but we took the view, everybody was on the view that he must be traced, with one senior officer's exception.
Why I wasn't so convinced from the word go is difficult to quantify.
Might write again if up north. Jack the Ripper.
Rather peculiar, is it not, that a killer reviews his victim's background in such depth and then sends a letter to the investigating officer telling him something which he must already know.
Zachrisson's doubts would prove to be well-founded. It was the hoaxer who had been reviewing the Ripper victims' backgrounds, trawling through the countless newspaper articles about the murders and picking out details. It was this research, coupled with a few shrewd guesses about the Ripper's behavior, that made the hoaxer's letters so convincing. However, there was a detail that would have revealed that the letters were the work of a hoaxer from the very beginning. But Oldfield and Holland didn't even notice it. They bore one peculiar characteristic, taken from a 19th century hoax. Entire phrases had been copied from the original Jack the Ripper letters, faked in the 1880s. The Yorkshire Ripper hoaxer was fascinated by them.
When you examine the letters closely, you can see the similarity between words that the hoaxer was using and words that appeared in the original Jack the Ripper letters that had been sent to Scotland Yard in the 1880s.
One phrase in particular was that bit about leather apron gave me real fits of laughter. Our present writer was saying that photo in the paper gave me fits.
Despite being informed of this connection to the Victorian Ripper, West Yorkshire Police chose to disregard it, becoming convinced that the man writing to them had to be the real Yorkshire Ripper. By the summer of 1979, Sutcliffe had killed 10 women. Police had interviewed him a total of 9 times, and even taken a sample of his handwriting. But it hadn't matched that of the hoax letters, which the Ripper Squad now took to be written by their prime suspect. The letters had let Sutcliffe off the hook. But it was to be the hoaxer's next move that would push the police inquiry away from Sutcliffe completely. A move that would create one of the most infamous moments in British criminal history.
I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me.
I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you are no nearer catching me now than 4 years ago when I started.
The taunting voice on the tape spoke to George Oldfield directly. Oldfield never doubted for a moment that this was the voice of the Ripper, and took it as a personal challenge.
I reckon your boys are letting you down, George. They can't be much good, can they?
The first time I heard the tape, George Oldfield explained to us that this had to be taken seriously, and it could well be the voice of the killer.
I'm not quite sure when I'll strike again, but it will be definitely sometime this year.
Even if he was not the Ripper, he knew so much about it that he was going to lead us to who it was.
I was trying to think, have I interviewed anybody that's got the same voice as this? You know, listening to it very carefully and thinking, you know, is this anybody that I've questioned? And so we were trying to pick up any threads of, you know, the turn of expression or the tone of the voice, and it didn't seem to be disguised, the tone of the voice or the accent.
Well, it's been nice chatting to you, George. Yours, Jack the Ripper.
Hearing the Yorkshire Ripper with a northeast accent was not what the police had expected. This gave them an entirely new profile of the man they were seeking.
The letters and tape had been subjected to linguistic experts, and we chose the two foremost available in the north of England, Jack Winsor-Lewis and Stanley Ellis.
This was an identifiable voice. There must be people all over the area who would know this man, his relatives and his neighbours.
They never learn, do they, George? I bet you've warned them, but they never listen.
Well, it was very, very carefully made. You know, he'd obviously written it out beforehand. You could guess that very confidently from the way he delivered it in chunks with long spaces between it.
The only time they came near catching me was a few months back in Chapeltown.
The guy in the tape tried to say, "Don't look for me in Sunderland." He was trying to pretend he had no connection with Sunderland because he was pretending to be the Yorkshire Ripper, you know, and he wanted to suggest that he came from Yorkshire. But, of course, his voice obviously showed that he had at least been brought up in Sunderland.
So I went to Sunderland, and we went from the mouth of the Wear on the north bank to pubs and clubs and various villages, working our way upstream. And when we got into Castletown, I spoke to people, and these were really the voice or the kind of pronunciation that I wanted to hear.
Directly as a result of this linguistic analysis, the Ripper Squad switched the focus of their investigation to the Castletown area of Wearside. Ironically, Peter Sutcliffe was at this same time eliminated from inquiries. As it now appeared, he had the wrong accent. And that is how Peter Sutcliffe, the real Yorkshire Ripper, was able to continue his killing spree, while the police launched a nationwide manhunt for the wrong person. By sending his spine-chilling tape to the police, the man who would come to be known as Wearside Jack had become an accomplice to murder. But it would take police another 25 years to track him down. It was the summer of 1979, and the hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper was at its height, when a cassette arrived at West Yorkshire Police HQ. It would change the entire focus of the investigation. The police went public.
I'm Jack. I see you are still having no luck catching me.
The flat Sunderland accented voice on the tape claimed to be the Yorkshire Ripper himself.
We know now that we are definitely looking for a man who originated in the northeast.
Journalists from all over the country had come to Leeds for the announcement, and the atmosphere inside that room was electric.
And I couldn't believe what I was hearing, because suddenly the monster was still faceless, but he had a voice.
See you soon. Bye. Hope you like the catchy tune at the end.
We got tremendous public response, and we were sure that when we gave the recordings of the voice, we were certain that we would get the perpetrator.
And anyone who missed the tape recording can now put a phone call in to Leeds 46911 and put the Yorkshire Ripper's voice on the line to them.
You are no nearer catching me now. than 4 years ago when I started.
The influx of information was absolutely terrific. We had installed 10 incoming post office lines just to take information from the public. That worked, but the trouble with it was that by recording everything, quite a lot of dross and useless information and useless enquiries were logged.
In this pre-computer age, the information that the public appeal created overwhelmed the Ripper Squad.
Never before has there been a case of this nature and this enormity. You know, 500,000 nominal index cards has never been seen before or since. You know, and this has got to be placed very much in context with the era and the time.
They intercepted over 15 million letters coming out of the Sunderland area and screened thousands of voice samples. Hundreds of officers were dispatched to raid homes and social clubs across the north of England in search of a man whose voice matched the one on their recording.
I was working as a barman in a local club, and then this bunch of plainclothes detectives came in, set up a table on the stage, and they just played the tape. So, you know, it kind of reverberated around the concert room. It was packed, there was about 150 to 200 people in. And that stayed with me, that memory, because it was just so unusual.
You go to the cinema, and before the usual sort of da-da, Pearl and Dean, the handwriting had come on the screen. The voice would be played.
The words, "I'm Jack," were instantly recognisable. That's all that people needed to hear to know that this was the voice of the Yorkshire Ripper.
And in a way, it gave women sort of false confidence, because you felt, as long as you didn't bump into a guy who had that horrible "I'm Jack," that deep, guttural, Wearside accent, then you were safe. And the answer was, of course, that you certainly were not.
In a heavily publicised campaign, the police were looking for the Ripper in Sunderland. Sutcliffe knew that the hunt was completely diverted away from him. It was a distraction that gave him fresh opportunity. Within 2 months of the nation hearing what they believed to be the Ripper's voice, the real Ripper savagely attacked a 20-year-old student, Barbara Leach.
She was attacked, hit on the head with a hammer, dragged down the alley, and she got the abdominal injuries, the head injuries, killed, and was left covered in old junk and carpets.
This latest murder, coupled with the hysteria created by the killer's supposed recording only a few weeks earlier, put the Yorkshire Ripper on the front pages of newspapers across the world. The killer was now attacking random members of the public. It seemed as if anyone could now fall victim.
Sutcliffe clearly had felt that this was some kind of brilliant piece of good luck for him, or, in his own words, divine inspiration. He became more daring, more driven after the tapes arrived.
In the next 12 months, Sutcliffe attacked 3 more women, killing 1 and seriously injuring 2.
I don't think there's any doubt that as a direct result of the hoax and the diversion of the enquiries, other women were attacked. I've got little doubt about that.
People were getting angry. They were saying, but you've got his handwriting. You know what he sounds like. Why can't you get him?
The police inquiry had disintegrated. The squad were drowning in paperwork, yet still had no likely new leads. Meanwhile, the Ripper was making a mockery of him, and pressure was coming directly from number 10 to solve the case.
Mrs. Thatcher was absolutely horrified that this case had dragged on for so long, and literally thumped the table, demanded to see the Home Secretary, Willie Whitelaw, and by all accounts was on the verge of going up to Leeds to sort it out herself.
A new strategy had to be developed, and although politicians can't direct police officers, they can obviously put tremendous political pressure on them. And of course this happens. The media put tremendous pressure on the officers concerned, and everybody has a determination to get this thing cleared up as quickly as possible.
At that time, George Oldfield, his health was declining badly. We didn't know, and I don't think he appreciated, how badly his health had gone.
Eventually, Oldfield suffered a heart attack and was removed from the investigation. The team was taken over by a new boss, Assistant Chief Constable Jim Hobson, in an attempt to reinvigorate the investigation.
So Mr. Hobson takes over now from Mr. George Oldfield. But can the hunt at last be successful?
I'm certain it can be done. The morale of the force is very high, and despite what people say about public confidence, I'm sure that we've got the confidence of the public behind us.
But, as if to torment the new team, Sutcliffe immediately struck again.
So last week, Jacqueline Hill became the 13th victim of the Yorkshire Ripper, and police here have no doubts that 10 of those killings were committed by the same man. So in 5 years of looking for him, what picture have they now built up of Britain's most wanted man? He has a strong Wearside accent. His letters show a peculiar sloping style of handwriting, suggesting he's slightly brighter than average.
For Wearside Jack, this latest stream of murders had proved too much. His dangerous game had gone horribly wrong. Panicked, he contacted the police to confess.
It's a hoax!
A great amount of calls and letters were still coming in at this point, and this was another call. This was a matter of him ringing in and saying the tape is a fake.
The Ripper.
He didn't qualify that with any supporting information, which meant that it could have been taken more seriously. And again, why did he do that?
Unusually, the final part of this confession was recorded.
What's the fake? The tape recorder. What one is this? The one that you just received? The Ripper. The recorder.
Did the magnitude of what he'd done, sending the letters in the tape, derailing the inquiry to such an extent that they were hunting a killer from Sunderland, did the magnitude of that hit him then?
He's seen this massive police effort in Sunderland to find out who sent this tape and thought the net is closing around him. And was it a case of calling off the dogs because he saw that the net was closing and that the chances of him being caught were increasing?
Distressed by what he'd done and realizing the seriousness of his actions, the hoaxer tried to commit suicide, throwing himself off the Wearmouth Bridge. A passing boat broke his 100-foot fall, and he was fished out of the water by a police launch. Ironically, the most wanted man in Britain, the man who had claimed to be the Ripper in 3 taunting letters and a tape, had ended up in a police station in Sunderland. He said nothing of the hoax and was sent home. By 1981, Wearside Jack had gone to ground. The Yorkshire Ripper, however, was still at large. But now, in its 6th year, his reign of terror was also about to reach its end game. On the 2nd of January, Sutcliffe went on the hunt for his 14th victim.
Sutcliffe picks up a prostitute. She takes him to a driveway of a large unoccupied house that was being used as offices. He's talking to her when a passing police patrol decide to just check on this vehicle.
We were patrolling an area where prostitutes frequent. We saw a Rover car parked. We approached the vehicle, made certain enquiries with the force control. As regards the vehicle, it came back that the vehicle was bearing false number plates.
Sutcliffe gives them some cock and bull story about having had an argument with his wife and wanted to go and pick up a prostitute but didn't really want to be found, and therefore he'd stolen the number plates.
Realizing that he was about to be taken into custody, Sutcliffe asked to be allowed to urinate, and in the process dumped his hammer and knife behind an oil tank. The police arrested him for theft and usage of false license plates, completely unaware that they had just apprehended the Yorkshire Ripper.
It was decided that he would be charged with stealing the number plates, but because of his manner and evasiveness, they were not satisfied and stuck making inquiries and interviews all day.
Now, unfortunately for Sutcliffe, one of the men who'd arrested him was an old-time copper, and he suddenly felt compelled to go back up to the site where they'd arrested him, begin poking around, and sure enough, he found the hammer and the knife that had been dropped. And that really was the beginning of the end for Sutcliffe.
After finding the hammer and knife, the Ripper squad knew they were onto something. Sutcliffe had, by this point, been left waiting for hours and had become increasingly agitated. He suspected that they'd been back to the scene of his arrest and that his murder weapons must have been found. Sutcliffe's own paranoia would result in an astonishing confession.
What about Yorkshire Ripper? Well, it's me.
Once it started his voluntary statement, and in fact I made my mind up it was him. Whatever he said, I'd made my mind up it was him.
I remember hearing, and like everybody else, was staggered that he'd, finally been arrested. Elation in a way that, this man has, now stopped in his tracks, and it was finally resolved.
He is being questioned in relation to the Yorkshire Ripper murders.
After an intense and dramatic 5-year investigation, the Ripper squad had finally got their man. Bradford lorry driver Peter Sutcliffe was the Yorkshire Ripper.
And I can tell you that we are absolutely delighted with developments at this stage. Absolutely delighted.
But there was still a problem. When questioned about the letters and the tape he had supposedly sent, Sutcliffe adamantly denied sending them.
I saw the letters and the tape as a diversion, something that directed attention from me completely. I thought that God had intervened. I saw it as a sign to carry on.
Peter Sutcliffe was charged with 13 counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with a recommendation that he never be released.
Can you tell us whether he has a Geordie accent?
I cannot tell you that because I've not heard him speak.
Interest in Wearside Jack was overshadowed by the relief that the police felt, having finally caught their man. Officially, the Hoaxer case was still open, but the investigation was wound down. The police were keen to draw a discreet veil over the disastrous bungle that allowed the Ripper to continue his killing spree. Dick Holland would become a scapegoat for the investigation. He spent the rest of his career as a uniformed officer in a remote Yorkshire village. His old boss, George Oldfield, would never recover. Humiliated by the Hoaxer, he died just 4 years later in 1985. The mystery of Wearside Jack, however, continued to hang over the memory of the Ripper investigation. Until this year, when 25 years after Sutcliffe's conviction, the police reopened the book on the Hoaxer case. Using the latest technological breakthroughs in forensic science, they were finally able to crack this great criminal mystery.
Now, yesterday I understand that a 49-year-old man was arrested here in his home by detectives who travelled from West Yorkshire, and they arrested him on suspicion of attempting to pervert the course of justice.
Following the conviction of Peter Sutcliffe for the murder of 13 women, the Yorkshire Ripper went down as the most infamous serial killer in British crime history. But one missing piece of the jigsaw remained: the hoax, a fabrication that had led directly to the murders of 3 women. Although the police closed the book on the Ripper Hoaxer, leaving it unsolved, it continued to fascinate the public. In 1998, the Sunderland Echo ran a 20-year anniversary feature asking, who was Wearside Jack?
Absolutely flooded with calls, with letters, with information, not just from people who wanted to say, oh yeah, I remember that time, I was working here, that and there and everywhere, and I remember the tape. People were actually phoning in and saying, I know who it was.
I'm Jack.
The question of who did send the letters and the tape was unfinished business. Unfinished business for West Yorkshire Police.
Not quite sure when I'll start again.
The Wearside Jack story would not go away, and for the police, this had become an increasingly embarrassing situation. In response, the West Yorkshire Police Force reopened the case, ordering a major audit of all archived evidence.
We're fairly sure that the original letters and the envelopes were destroyed following fingerprint testing because some heavy-duty chemicals were being used at the time, which actually turned the paper black. And we were satisfied that when we'd gone through all our material, that we didn't have the letters or the original tape.
Despite this loss of most of the original evidence, a trawl through the boxes and bags of what did remain turned up a tiny portion of the envelope in which one of the hoax's letters had been sent. The police knew that the sender of the letter would have had to lick the envelope to seal it. But was it possible to extract a DNA sample from a 27-year-old mix of spit and gum?
We knew that with modern-day science, we had to have a good chance of success here. Low copy number is cutting-edge DNA science, and it's where you can actually draw DNA from something as small as a speck of dandruff or even the moisture from a fingerprint.
The DNA was put into the police's national database, and incredibly, an exact profile was found. It was 1,000,000 to 1 that this wasn't the profile of Wearside Jack.
My first question was, where's he from? And Peter said he was from Sunderland, and at that point I thought, this has got to be the guy.
Now, yesterday I understand that a 49-year-old man...
West Yorkshire Police not saying anything more this morning. Their brief statement last night that a 49-year-old man had been brought back from Sunderland to a police station here in West Yorkshire as part of their inquiry.
On the 20th of October 2005, it was national headline news. The Ripper hoaxer had been arrested. Over the next few days, information about who this man was leaked out. He was John Humble, a 49-year-old man who'd been 22 when the hoax was made. He was now unemployed, an alcoholic, and estranged from his wife, living in squalor in a Sunderland housing estate. But could this shambolic character really be responsible for carrying out one of the greatest hoaxes in British criminal history? To neighbours and friends, Humble's involvement seemed implausible.
I didn't know what was going on when I found out. I said, oh no, not John. Can it be John, you know?
He's an harmless bloke, you know what I mean? You wouldn't harm a fly, you know?
I thought there's something happened with him, but never thought it would have been this.
Humble was, in fact, no stranger to the police. In 1975, he was imprisoned for assaulting an officer. A further 2 arrests followed in 2002, and as a result, the police had his DNA profile on record.
Initially, when he was asked, you know, did you send the hoax letters, he shook his head in a no, so he was actually denying it at that point. But when it was disclosed to his solicitor and himself that there was a DNA profile from one of the envelopes which matched him, and being a 1 in a billion chance that it was anybody else, that certainly focused his mind.
John Humble's remarkable confession was captured by police on video.
I did send it.
Just repeat that for me. What did you say?
I did send the letter.
He confesses to doing the letters, he confesses to doing the tape, and then he's asked the obvious question, why?
I don't know why I done it. It must have been daft.
He said he was bored, he said he was trying to increase his notoriety, he said it was an evil thing to do, a wicked thing to do. He gave a variety of reasons.
The police had Humble's confession, but to make absolutely sure that this was their man, they asked him to read from the original 1979 Wearside Jack tape transcript.
Would you read that for us, please, John?
I'm Jack. I say you are still having no luck catching me. I have the greatest respect for you, George, but Lord, you are no near catching me now than 4 years ago when I started. I reckon your boys are letting you down, George.
I would love to have been in that room at that time, because how weird that would have been.
See you soon. Bye. Hope you like the catchy tune at the end.
John Humble appeared in the dock here at Leeds Crown Court this morning, and the 4 charges against him were read out. They are that between
On the 9th of January 2006, John Humble was charged with 4 counts of perverting the course of justice. Despite his taped confession, he pleaded not guilty, with his defence team claiming he couldn't remember undertaking the hoax. But no one would find this declaration of innocence convincing.
I've always thought that he had blood on his hands. I'd always thought, no matter, how much he might like to convince himself he wasn't responsible for the deaths of these women, he actually shared in the fact that Sutcliffe had not been caught.
As far as West Yorkshire police were concerned, the evidence against him was watertight.
Once he was faced with the overwhelming scientific evidence, the voice analysis, all the admissions that he'd made on his interview, then he realised there was only one route and one route to take, and that was to accept this and plead guilty.
In a dramatic development, Sunderland-born John Humble stopped plans for a trial when he confessed to perverting the course of justice.
John Humble was sentenced to 8 years imprisonment on the 22nd of March 2006, 25 years after Peter Sutcliffe was jailed for life. Humble's unusually severe sentence was a reflection of the impact that his actions had had on the entire course of the Yorkshire Ripper investigation. His mischievous game had ended in disaster, and one of the great British criminal mysteries had finally been solved. Humble's conviction this year will allow West Yorkshire police to put to rest an embarrassing footnote in the legacy of this case. More importantly, it closed the book on one of the most infamous hoaxes of our time.
Yours, Jack the Ripper.